This video is an introduction to the process of meiosis, a form of cell division. At this point, you should be familiar with chromosome, chromatid, centrioles, spindle fibers, and the basic process of mitosis, which is another form of cellular division. If you're not familiar with these terms or the basic process of mitosis, which includes prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, then you should spend some time reviewing those items. In this set of notes, we're going to focus on the key concept that gametes have half the number of chromosomes that body cells have. There are four main ideas that we will cover. The first main idea is that you have body cells and gametes. Secondly, your cells have autosomes and sex chromosomes. Third, body cells are considered diploid, while gametes are considered haploid. And fourth, gametes are produced from diploid cells through the process of meiosis. Alright, so we're going to begin with the first main point, which is that you have body cells and gametes. Now, body cells and gametes make up the two major groups of cells. We're going to look at the first one, which are somatic cells. Somatic cells are your body cells. These are the cells in your body that make up all of your tissues, all of your organs. So pretty much anything you can think of is made up of a somatic cell. Your heart, your brain, your stomach, your skin, your bone, your blood, everything that is in an organism is composed of somatic cells. And all of the somatic cells have a complete copy of the DNA that makes you up. But it's really important to note that the DNA that is found in your somatic cells or in your body cells is not going to be passed on to your offspring. Passing on DNA to your offspring falls to the second major group of cells, and those are the germ cells. Now, the germ cells are sex cells, and they're only found in one place in your body, and that's in your reproductive organs. So if you're a female, then those are going to be found in your ovaries, and if you are male, then the germ cells are going to be found in your testicles. It's important to understand that your reproductive organs are made up of somatic cells, and that the somatic cells that make up your reproductive organs are the house where the germ cells reside. So your ovaries are not exclusively made of germ cells. There are somatic cells that make those up, and the same for your testicles, and then within those are where the germ cells are found. And the germ cells are very unique in that they also contain a complete set of your DNA, just like all the other cells in your body that are somatic contain. But what makes them unique is that these are the cells that are ultimately going to undergo the process of meiosis and pass that DNA on to your offspring. So if we go back and we think about somatic cells versus germ cells, the big things that you need to know are that, one, somatic cells are found everywhere in your body, and that they have a complete set of DNA, but they're not the ones passing it on to your offspring. That falls to the germ cells that are only found in your reproductive organs. And when it comes to cellular division, somatic cells are going to undergo the process of mitosis, whereas your germ cells are going to undergo the process of meiosis, which is what this video and this set of notes is going to cover. So within your cells, you've got all of your DNA, you've got a complete set of chromosomes, and in human beings, that's going to be a total of 46 chromosomes, 23 pair. One thing that's really important that you understand is that the number of chromosomes an organism has doesn't determine the complexity of that organism. So if we look at some examples here, Notice that yeast is used to make bread. Yeast undergoes aerobic fermentation, and the result of that is alcohol production. So we can use yeast in not just the production of bread, but also beer. Yeast has 32 chromosomes, and it pretty much just sits there and undergoes aerobic respiration. It's not a very complex organism when you really start to look at it. And then you got a fruit fly, this little thing that buzzes around in your house, in your kitchen, and after a week or so, suddenly it goes from having one or two fruit flies to having a dozen fruit flies. This is an organism that only has 8 chromosomes. Again, humans, very important that we know humans have 46 chromosomes broken up into 23 pairs. But you can look at other organisms and see that there are a large number of chromosomes. For example, ferns. Ferns have over 1,200 chromosomes. But just because they have that many chromosomes doesn't mean that a fern is a more complex organism than a human or a fruit fly. So what I really want you to take away from this in regards to the number of chromosomes that we see in an organism, which is something we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes, is that that doesn't determine the complexity of the organism. All right, so the second main point that we're going to look at is that your cells have autosomes and sex chromosomes. Now, that statement doesn't apply to just somatic cells or just to germ cells, but that statement applies to all of the cells in your body. Every cell in your body consists of 23 pairs of chromosomes for a total of 46. And of those 46, you're going to get 23 from your mom, and you're going to get 23 from your dad. And your body is going to use all 46 of those chromosomes in order to function properly. Because you're getting 23 from your mom and 23 from your dad, we often refer to chromosomes that match up with each other as being homologous chromosomes. So these are going to be two chromosomes that have the same structure, they have the same length, they have the same general appearance, they contain copies of the same genes. Really, the only difference is that one of them is coming from your mother and the other is coming from your father. And these chromosomes are going to be assigned a number. That number is based on the size of the chromosome. We're going to take and order those chromosomes, as you can see in the karyotyping image here on the screen. And the largest set of chromosomes, the largest homologous pair of chromosomes, is going to be assigned number 1. And we're going to rank these chromosomes based on size all the way down in human beings to 22, which is going to be the smallest homologous pair. So chromosomes number 1 through 22 are going to make up a group of chromosomes that are referred to as autosomes. Autosomes are very simply the chromosomes that contain genes for characteristics that are not directly related to the sex of an organism. But you may be thinking, now, wait, why did we only rank through number 22? Don't we have 23 pairs? And we do have 23 pairs. But that last pair, pair number 23, is a set of chromosomes that are directly involved with the development of the sexual characteristics of an organism. So in human beings, that's going to be your X and Y chromosome if you're male, or if you're female, that's going to be your X and your X chromosome. So when we look at the chromosomes and we start to organize them and kind of give them some identity, we see that the chromosomes that deal with all the other parts of making an organism what it is, the parts that deal with perhaps the development of the eyes, or muscle tissue, or bone tissue, or hair color, all of those chromosomes are going to be your autosomes. And then those two chromosomes that deal very specifically with the development of sexual characteristics, those are your sex chromosomes. In looking at organisms, we're going to use chromosomes as a way of helping us to determine the sex of that organism. For some organisms, it's very obvious. We can just look at it and there are physical characteristics that say, well, this is a male or this is a female. There are some organisms where it's not that simple and not that straightforward, and you've got to look deeper at more of a genetic level. Now, in mammals, we use what's called an XY system, and I think everyone's familiar with an XY system. If you've got an X and a Y chromosome, then you're a male. If you have two X chromosomes, then you're female. But not all organisms use the same system. For example, birds, butterflies, some fish, they use a system that is called a ZW system. And it's kind of flip and the opposite of what we see in mammals, where in mammals, if you've got two opposite sex chromosomes, X and Y, you are a male. However, in birds and fish and butterflies, if you've got two opposite chromosomes, in this case Z and W, then you're going to be a female. So it's important that we understand that, yes, chromosomes determine the sex of the organism based on its development and the encoding in the DNA in the chromosome, but not every organism follows the same pattern. In fact, there are some organisms that don't really even let the chromosomes make that decision. For example, alligators. Alligator sex is determined based on the temperature that is controlled during incubation. So a female alligator goes and builds a nest, lays her eggs, covers them up, and lets them lie there in the warm Florida sun, if you will. And as temperatures increase in the nest, if temperatures stay down in the mid-80s, then most of the hatchlings are going to be female. However, if temperatures rise and reach the low 90s, then most of the hatchlings are going to be male. So these are some different ways that organism gender is determined looking at chromosomes. All right, so next we're going to look at the third point, which is that body cells are diploid and gametes are haploid. So kind of what we've done up to this point is we started off by looking at the cells in an organism and breaking them into two parts. You have somatic cells, which make up all the body tissue, and then you have the sex cells, the germ cells, okay? And we said that the somatic cells undergo mitosis, which we previously studied, and that our germ cells are going to undergo meiosis, and that's what our study is about right now. In looking at those cells, we then looked a little deeper and we looked at the nuclear material at the chromosomes, and we were able to distinguish that chromosomes are even broken into two groups. You have your autosomes, which are going to be developing all the characteristics of that organism except for the sexual development of it, which falls to the sex chromosomes. The next thing that we're going to look at, and this is going to further help us distinguish between somatic cells and germ cells, is that your somatic cells in their normal state, when they're in that G1 cell cycle where they're just growing and going through their normal function, they are going to be what we refer to as diploid. Your gametes, which are going to be the end product of meiosis, are going to be haploid. And that's very important because when it comes to sexual reproduction, this is going to involve the fusion of two gametes, which results in offspring that are a genetic mixture of the parents. It's how you get genetic variation. So what you're doing is you're taking two cells that have half as many chromosomes as a normal cell has, and you're going to fuse them together so that the resulting cell has the appropriate number of chromosomes needed in order to function properly. Now, this fusion of the two gametes, the fusion of egg and sperm cell in order to form a single complete nucleus, this is referred to as fertilization. And it's at this point that this one single cell then begins to undergo mitosis, where it goes from one cell to two cells to four to eight and so on, and begins to eventually differentiate the cells and develop into an organism. So coming back to this concept of diploid and haploid, these are just descriptive terms that we use in order to describe the number of chromosome copies that are found in a cell. In a human cell, if we refer to a cell as being haploid, that means it has one copy of each chromosome. In humans, that's only going to apply to gametes. That's going to be our egg cell and our sperm cell. If we're referring to a cell as being diploid, then it's going to have two copies of each chromosome. And this is the normal state of our somatic cells. Now, remember that our somatic cells, yes, they spend the majority of their time in G1 in that first part of interphase, but at some point they're going to undergo cellular division, and that's when that cell is going to double its DNA. It's going to copy its DNA. So it's going to go from having two copies to four copies. And at that point, we would refer to that cell as being tetraploid, meaning that there are four copies of each of the chromosomes. So the concepts of haploid and diploid, or even triploid, is simply referring to the number of copies of chromosomes that we're observing in the nucleus. Now, again, a haploid cell, this is going to be your gamete, it's going to be your egg cell or your sex cell. It's only going to have half as many chromosomes, which means it's got one complete copy. That's going to be 22 autosomes and one sex chromosome, either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. Animals in general are only going to exist at a diploid level in their body cells. We don't typically see them existing beyond having just two copies. But there are a lot of other organisms out there that are not animals that we do see multiple copies of chromosomes. So, for example, cotton. Cotton is a plant, and it has a normal chromosome count of tetraploid, meaning it's got four copies. Wheat, kiwi fruit, that's going to be 6 copies, hexaploid. And then a plant like strawberries. Strawberries have 10 copies of each of their chromosomes. So it's really important that we know and understand that in what we're going to talk about in biology, we're probably at this point going to really limit it to human beings, especially when we talk about the process of meiosis, because that's what we're familiar with. That's what we can associate it with. But if we were looking at meiosis in other plants or other animals, we would have to be very mindful of the number of chromosomes that they would normally have. They may not be diploid. They may be an organism that is tetraploid. And so we just have to use this terminology to help us keep up with and understand what's happening throughout cellular division. It's also important to note that typically if you have a change in chromosome numbers from what is normally in an organism, that can be very harmful. A lot of times the organism isn't going to survive very far past the point of fertilization, but if it does, then a lot of times there are going to be issues with that organism. For example, if in a human being you have an extra copy of some chromosomes, you may have some developmental issues, one of which might be Down syndrome. So as we continue through meiosis, we're going to look at this concept of being diploid, of being haploid, of being tetraploid, which means you have 4 copies. And so it's really important that you understand that verbiage as we look at the process of cellular division moving forward. And then our last main idea is that gametes are produced from diploid cells through the process of meiosis. Now, meiosis is a form of nuclear division that divides a diploid cell into haploid cells. So meiosis, again, it's a part of nuclear division, just like mitosis is a form of nuclear division. The difference, and what we're going to look at here in our notes, is going to be some comparisons between mitosis and meiosis. It's really important that you spend some time with this and make sure that you're familiar with these comparisons that we're going to make. When we look at mitosis and we look at meiosis and the outcome of what both of these forms of cellular division are going to be, at a genetic level, mitosis is going to produce identical daughter cells, whereas meiosis, the daughter cells that are produced, are going to be unique. And there are some other things that happen in meiosis that we'll talk about later, such as crossing over and random assortment, that lead to genetic variation and what make the outcome of meiosis more unique as opposed to that of mitosis. The cells that we get at the end of mitosis are diploid, just like what we started with. However, with meiosis, the ending cells are going to be haploid. We're going to start with a diploid cell, and we're going to end up with haploid cells. Mitosis is a form of cellular division that's going to occur throughout an organism's lifetime. Mitosis happens in all of the somatic cells, and really the purpose of mitosis is to grow the organism. So we need multiple numbers of cells for tissues in order to fully develop organs. And then if there's any damage, then mitosis is going to occur where areas of damage have happened to the organism in order to repair and replace damaged cells. Meiosis, on the other hand, is not going to occur throughout an organism's lifetime, but it's only going to happen at certain times in the organism's life cycle. So it doesn't occur as frequently. And then finally, because mitosis results in a form of identical cells and you don't need any outside genetic material coming in, mitosis is a form of asexual reproduction, whereas meiosis is a form of sexual reproduction. All right, so that's a look at just an overview of chromosomes and cells and leading up to this process of meiosis. In these notes, we covered the key concept that gametes have half the number of chromosomes that body cells have, and we looked at these four main ideas that you need to be familiar with: that you have body cells and gametes, that the cells in your body consist of autosomes and sex chromosomes. Body cells are considered to be diploid, whereas gametes are haploid. And finally, gametes are produced from diploid cells through the process of meiosis.